Cultural Preservation Task Force meeting. This is Monday, February the 3rd, 2025. Can't believe the year is moving along so quickly. But again, thank you all for being here. To my colleagues, I appreciate your time and attention. And I had to take the lead on reading through all of this stuff. But we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. And I need to have a motion to adopt the agenda set before us. Hence is moved.
Second.
I have a second. Those in favor? And that's unanimous. And we have some minutes from the meeting on January the 6th. And I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Mr. Malik has moved. Do I have a second? Mr. Simmons has second. All those in favor? I'm assuming we have a quorum. I went through all of this. I guess we do. Okay.
Abstain from that because I wasn't at the last meeting.
So we have three to approve the minutes, and Mr. Hintz has abstained. Okay. All right. We have staff reports. This is the introduction to the Land Management Ordinance Priority Amendments, and Missy Lewick is going to take us through this. And calling to my attention that it's quite a bit of material, so we're going to try to let this flow. At any point, I'm sure she will pause if we have questions along the way, okay? All right, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Task Force. Missy Lewick, Director of Planning for the record. Yes, as your chair mentioned, there are quite a few priority amendments that we wanted to review and introduce with the task force today. As we have talked about with our Land Management Ordinance Amendment Project, that the task force is one of those bodies that we're going to review code with as it unfolds. And so the larger priority amendments project is one that is part of the town strategic action plan and one that we've been implementing under the growth management strategy. The Land Management Ordinance Amendment Project is broken into two main pieces. There were priority amendments that were priority issues that were critical, that needed to be addressed ahead of the full code overhaul. And so these are the priority amendments. These are those incremental changes that are really to address those important and urgent issues that cannot wait for that full amendment. And these are to address pressing community development issues with the best short-term solution while minimizing any unintended outcome. And there certainly are a number of other issues that require additional analysis that are included in the full code amendment project. So just to kind of refresh for you all, we have adopted a series of amendments already within this priority amendment component of the project. We adopted 3 phases of amendments in 2023 and another amendment in 2024 related to floor area ratio. In September of last year, we reviewed 10 amendment topics with council at a workshop. And those are the same amendment topics that we're going to talk about with you today that are being brought forward to you for introduction. And we're hosting a public hearing on these amendments with the Planning Commission on February 19th. So again, before you today, these amendments are for introduction, for review, for your feedback, and any questions as we finalize these sets for that public hearing that's going to the Planning Commission. So as we go through these topics, if you have questions, feel free to work with Chairperson Stevens on whether you want to ask those at the end or interrupt me as I go. That is up to you all. There is a 32-page staff report with all of this information outlined in it, as well as those draft text amendments that are part of the packet. But I'll try to give this a higher level overview of some of these text amendments, some of the community concerns that these amendments are addressing, and then an analysis of the amendment itself. So the first one is a workforce housing density bonus. And that is an amendment to the town's existing density bonus program for workforce housing. And it is one of the amendments that is intended to assist with entitlement of the North Point site, which is the town's public-private partnership. That workforce housing development proposal is on 11 acres of town-owned property located on William Hilton Parkway near the Cross Island Parkway. It's envisioned to be an energy-efficient, sustainable neighborhood with high-quality architecture and the ability to feature between 150 and 170 rental units, which would be a mix of 1 and 2 and 3 bedroom units. The project has some workforce affordability components that are threaded into that, meaning that there are area median income requirements between 60 and 150% of Beaufort County's AMI, and that at least half of the units are reserved for those that earn below 80% of that area median income. The proposal is to add RM12 as a zoning district to the workforce housing density bonus program. There would be a separate zoning map amendment application to rezone the property, which is currently Parks and Recreation zoning, or PR, to that RM12 district. So the Planning Commission at their meeting later this month will both hear the public hearing for that zoning map amendment component, as well as the text amendment that I'll further describe. So we reviewed this text amendment in concept in September with council, and they provided some feedback on, as it relates to the amendment, and that we needed to manage some of the impervious coverage that's included in the amendment set, that the focus should be on major corridors, and that some districts may be suitable for higher density development in some specific areas. We introduced this set with the Planning Commission last month. They needed some clarification on a couple of areas, on whether short-term rentals would be allowed within this density bonus, some additional analysis on that impervious coverage, and some mapping of RM12 properties, which we'll include in that public hearing set. So the amendment overall is to add RM12 into the density bonus program. Right now, the workforce housing density bonus program is only eligible within our RM4 district, meeting certain criteria. This would add RM12 as an eligible district for workforce housing density bonus if certain criteria are also met. And some of those criteria are listed on the screen here. The property must meet a minimum parcel size of 5 acres. So A, be zoned RM12, and B, at least 5 acres. Also must be located on a major arterial. And then if they, and then the density bonus is a 25% density bonus, allowing up to 15 dwelling units per acre, provided that at least 50% of all units qualify as workforce housing, and short-term rentals would not be permitted. There is, with the density bonus program, if 50% or more of the units are qualified workforce housing, then the maximum impervious coverage allowance can be increased from 35% to 45%. We've done some additional research on impervious coverage as it relates to other communities in their zoning districts that are similar to RM12. And some of those are outlined here. We plan to dive in and offer additional research and analysis on this. But we looked at the city of Charleston, Charleston County, Beaufort County, Bluffton, Town of Port Royal, Hardeeville, Georgetown County, and Surfside Beach. And of those ranges, the average impervious coverage for similar multifamily districts was around 56%. We also provided a comparison table of our existing Town of Hilton Head zoning districts and their impervious coverage requirements. And by looking at this chart, you can see that the existing zoning districts within the town have impervious coverage ranges between 35% to 65%. And you can see here that comparison. And here's a map of the properties that could be eligible for this density bonus program. So again, located on a major arterial zoned RM12 and at least 5 acres. So if there are no questions on this one, I will move on to the next amendment. Yes,
Of
sir.
those 3 qualifying properties that you mentioned there, who has ownership rights to those lands, do you know?
They're all privately held, except
privately
for
held?
the North Point site, which is the properties owned by the town
Okay.
of Hilton Head.
And one quick question, do we know what the definition of workforce housing is? That means, is there a standard or?
There is a definition in our code, and I can pull that up with certainty, but the definition is housing that's affordable at between 60 and 100% of the AMI for Beaufort County. But I could have one of my staff members look that up and pull that up on the screen so we can read the actual definition.
Always seem to be a challenge, even when we say it's workforce housing. I don't know if it's affordable or not, but just kind
Yeah.
of curious what that
We-
price range
We
falls in.
can find that in the code, in the definition section, and pull that up before
Okay.
we're done today. Okay?
I'm sorry, Mr. Hens.
So North Point, can provide housing for those making 60 to 150% of AMI. Does that mean that all of North Point isn't necessarily workforce housing?
No, so North Point also has a criteria that 50% will be at 80% or lower. And our workforce housing density bonus program only requires that a certain percentage of the units are, for density bonus, are, meet the requirements of workforce housing. So both the development agreement criteria and the town's workforce housing program criteria can be met with the proposed project.
Okay.
If you would like that to, in the next set, to be spelled out more clearly, we can certainly add that level of clarity in the analysis.
It would help me if we could if I could get an idea of what that actual number for a unit would potentially cost at those ratios.
Okay.
And only one was owned by the town.
Yes.
So this is so the ones that have been identified, I guess the owners as well has been participating with this to come up with the numbers, or it's just properties that you've,
That meet that criteria. So the frontage on a major arterial and the RM12 designation and the 5 acre minimum size. It would require those other sites to be at a stage that they're ready to potentially redevelop, and whether or not they wanted to take advantage of this particular density bonus program or not.
so, but I mean, but the properties have been identified, but I mean, if there have been contact with owners that their property has been otherwise identified, do the owners know that they have an opportunity that may or might exist for them? Have those owners been notified, I guess is my question.
Right, we did not send notification to those other property owners, other than they will be receiving the public notice for the zoning map amendment, just like the other parcels that are part of the North Point rezoning. But we certainly can reach out to make sure that they're aware of the public hearing that's coming up.
Okay, I guess I'm a little taken, but I guess we can move on. I mean, because if properties are gonna be rezoned, and there are a couple of private parcels within this study,
So
and
the So a text amendment requirement, the public notice requirement is an advertisement in the newspaper. There are a number of text amendments that we're going to be talking about that affect many parcels throughout the town, and we do not provide direct notice to all of those parcels that may be impacted. Similarly, the existing density bonus program in RM4, certain criteria have to be met, but it could be applied to many parcels within the RM4 district that may or may not wish to participate in the density bonus program. It's just an eligible opportunity should they choose to develop in that way with workforce housing. They do not have to redevelop or develop utilizing the density bonus program.
Okay, I mean, okay, that better explains it. I mean, I just,
Okay.
I thought it was a blanket change
Okay.
in property designation, but it's just rule that would exist and you can so decide.
That's correct.
Oh, okay.
It is a tool
Okay.
that could be applied should those properties wish to add more development to their sites, if they wanted to develop
Okay.
within the
Okay.
criteria that's required through the program, yes.
All right.
Good question.
So,
It was there was another question relative to the impervious coverage. It seems like that you increased the impervious, but, and that may be a relative question. I think this was back on your analysis down in impervious cover allowance.
Yep.
If I understand that correctly, you allow more and get
That's correct. It's
All
similar
covered.
to the density bonus, right, where you're allowed to have additional density if we're getting qualified workforce housing. And in that, the impervious coverage bonus, to allow for up to 10% more. Currently, ARM 12 has an impervious coverage limitation of 35%. But if you're going to have at least 50% or more of the units as workforce, then you're allowed to have an impervious coverage up to 45%. And so that is proposed so that you can actually fit that additional density on your site.
all right. Thank you.
Okay. We can come back if you think of anything else as well. And I'll make sure we get that definition before we're done today, too. Single family and commercial mass and scale. We have heard a lot of feedback over the past few years about some changes in the built environment as it relates to single family and commercial properties, and that both the mass and scale of the newer development seems to be out of character with the surrounding area and existing surroundings. And so this amendment is an incremental change in how we measure height that should address to some degree, that at least building height as far as its scale goes. So the other change that's proposed is to address some of the setback encroachment allowances. We'd heard some feedback from council about development being out of scale and that some buildings are too high and that we needed better separation between units, minimum lot sizes and increasing setbacks. The Planning Commission wanted to understand height measurement methods from other areas. So how do other communities measure height? So the proposed amendment is outlined in the analysis section. And this amendment is limited in its applicability and scope just to change how height is measured and to provide some restrictions on setback encroachments. So right now, height is measured from 13 or 11 feet above base flood elevation or pre-development grade, whichever is higher. And 11 is for commercial properties and 13 is for residential. The proposed change is to revise it so that you're measuring from pre-development grade, so you're measuring from the ground up. Setback encroachment restriction, this came from, we have a lot of properties that have very minimal setbacks, such as a 3-foot or 5-foot setback, but our standard setback encroachment allowances allow further encroachments within to those setbacks. So what's proposed is to prohibit any allowable encroachment within 10 feet of a property line. So that means if you have a building that has a 20-foot setback, you can still seek relief from and encroachments from within what's prescribed in the setback encroachment table. But if you have a setback that's less than 10 feet, then you wouldn't be able to have any setback encroachments. You could still go to the Board of Zoning Appeals should you need relief from setbacks and/or buffers. We identified some comparisons of some additional communities on how they measure building height. And the majority of these measure from elevation grade or finish grade, although they are not all worded the same. So you can look here and see that measuring from finish grade or grade is something that area communities do use. So we wanted to make sure that it was in line with other communities in our area. Do you have any questions on that before we move forward?
The result of these measurements, will we get not as high a building? Is that the goal, to have a not as tall building? With these measurements, if you're measuring from a different spot, you're gonna get a...
Right. It's not proposing that any of our existing building heights are changing. It's just from where you're measuring from. So sometimes if you're measuring from, say, 13 base flood elevation, that might be a couple feet off the ground or off grade, right? So where your zero is not at the ground level. So when zero is up here and you can go 45 feet up and someone looks and they say, gosh, that looks like a really tall building. Are you sure that's within our height limits? Well, it does feel like it might be taller and larger because it is, because zero is not measured from the grade.
So will it increase or not increase the height of a building?
Well, building height would still be measured, but in that same scenario, if, say, you were measuring that zero was 3 feet off the ground, then you wouldn't be measuring from there, and so the building would be 3 feet shorter, but it still is 45 feet tall per our code. So it would have the appearance that it is.
Question, Counselor?
Hi, y'all know me, I'm Chester Williams. Let me tell you what the potential problem with this is that the building code requires residential construction to be a minimum of 13 feet above mean sea level for the first floor. Just to give you an example, the first house my wife and I owned was in Sea Pines, and at grade, that lot was 7 feet. So if you're building new on that lot now, under these regulations, your height limitation under the LMO would be measured from that 7-foot level, but the building code would require the first floor to be at 13 feet. So 6 feet. So you've lost 6 feet in the permissible height of the building. But to answer your question, Mr. Simmons, this will lower the restrictions, lower the height on a lot of structures, and on others won't do anything at all. If grade is 13 feet for a house, then you can go up to 45 or 35, whatever it is. If grade is 20 feet, where I live now in Spanish Wells, I think grade is 20 feet. You'd measure that height from that point. So there's a conflict between, right now, the LMO and the building code are in sync. 13 feet for residential, 11 feet for commercial. This will make a radical change for a lot of possible situations where you will end up effectively reducing the maximum height of the building under the provisions of the LMO. Thank you.
Thank you for that question and that clarification, Missy. Is that something that you can or need to respond to?
We will add additional analysis of properties that are either commercial properties below 11 and residential below 13, to make sure that we have that analysis of those properties that would have the potential for lesser height, and bring that forward. So we'll make sure that we have that when we take it to the planning commission.
Hence, you had a question?
Yeah, I think the intent is you're going, here's a neighborhood where all the houses are built on grade, and then there's a new house coming up in that neighborhood. It would be lifted, you know, that much higher because of the flood, and then they get the maximum height. So here's all the houses whose roof lines are here, and this one would be much higher because now it can,
But that only applies in situations where grade is below 13 feet.
right.
If grade is at 13 feet or higher, there won't be any difference in the height. So this will cause problems for those people who haven't, I don't know right off what the elevation is in the Skull Creek area along Skull Creek, but I suspect it's not 13 feet above mean sea level, which means anything new built over there is going to have a lower effective height limitation under this provision than it has now under the current code provisions. Because you still got to comply with the building code. The building code says you can't build anything below 13 feet above mean sea level, but if your height limitation has to start at right along Skull Creek, maybe it's 4 feet above mean sea level. I don't know. But you're going to lose a substantial portion of your permitted height limitations under this if your grade is below 13 feet.
But that's what this new zoning requirement is trying to impact, is you don't want it to look.
What you're going to do, though, is you're going to have houses around already that were built at the 13 regulation, and now this is going to be much lower. This will be the odd man out now. Thanks.
I will have that additional analysis. Is there anything else that you're looking for us to research as it relates to either historic neighborhoods, and this amendment particularly? Okay,
I think we're good for now.
okay. Subdivision regulations. We have heard feedback and concerns that, again, recent developments are not in alignment with some of the desired community standards. Some residential subdivisions have had excessive tree clearing and overly linear lot development and layouts, a lot of monotonous design, inadequate open space and connectivity, and however, our regulations that govern subdivisions are spread over multiple sections of the code. They're not just confined in one particular section. Therefore, the bulk of the changes that would affect change in our subdivisions would happen in the full code overhaul. But what we've identified is a fairly focused change to our subdivision regulations to achieve some better connectivity to internal pathways and sidewalks, as well as connecting if there is a town public pathway. We had heard broadly from the town council workshop that we needed to have more regulation for intentional, well-designed open spaces within subdivisions, and regulations that are sensitive to our environment, celebrate our trees and view sheds, and that, quality design in our subdivisions was important. The proposed amendment has some criteria that affect pathways and sidewalks, as I mentioned. It defines that developments have to include pathway and sidewalk connections to the open space, any community amenities, and town's existing pathway systems where those are feasible. It ensures that there's integrated and accessible infrastructure within the neighborhood. that pathways or sidewalks are required on one side of the street in certain contexts and both sides, depending on the character of that subdivision. It provides some design standards for pathways and sidewalks to ensure safety, accessibility, and integration within the surrounding environment. So it's a fairly minimal change to our subdivision standards, but this is what is proposed. I will say that this is for our minor and major subdivisions, but it does not apply to our family subdivision. That is a separate process with separate criteria and applicability, and this proposed change is not included in our family subdivision chapter.
I think you're good.
Okay. Adaptive reuse of existing hotels and motels. As our community continues to evolve, there is a need to address the adaptive reuse of hotel properties, especially when there are changing market conditions and housing demands. And workforce housing commercial conversion is currently allowed with conditions in the LMO that would allow for conversions of hotels to multifamily. We've been hearing from some who wish to redevelop some hotels and motels that program doesn't allow the densities that make this kind of conversion feasible. So because of that, there's an amendment proposed to establish some regulations for that conversion to occur, meeting certain criteria. The amendment is focused on high-quality standards for conversions, including functional kitchen units and communal spaces that allow for that interaction, serve practical purposes, and enhance the property's utility. They're intended to align these reuse projects with our community priorities and maintain livability of those who live within these units, that they have more communal spaces than just the small room that they may lease. We heard some feedback from council on this, and that we do need housing that's accessible and meets the needs of our community. We have aging hotels and motels, and currently our regulations don't allow a conversion at this ratio of potentially 1-to-1, like one hotel motel unit to one dwelling unit. They were looking for kitchen facilities as a minimum requirement, that these properties have a minimum level of care, and then standards for communal space to ensure that there are livability components included in the policy. We heard some feedback at the Planning Commission. They wanted some clarification on whether the building has to be currently operating as a hotel. There's a question as to whether a hotel building that is not currently operating as a hotel right now, but has in its past, is it eligible? And we're still working on some language on the actual code amendment to clarify that. They wanted a comparison in the analysis of the existing workforce housing commercial conversion to this proposed hotel motel conversion program, of which we will do in that next set. They wanted us to clarify the workforce housing program applicability and the number of units that are required to be included, and clarify if this applies also to timeshares in addition to hotels and motels. So this, the application is intended that it is for existing hotels or motels that are operating at the time that this ordinance would go into effect. So it wouldn't be like a new hotel that would come online that could then be converted. And the units cannot be short-term rentals. The units have to qualify per our existing workforce housing program requirements. There are requirements that each dwelling meets some minimum dwelling unit sizes, some basic amenities, kitchen, bath, living, storage. The parking requirements are that the developer supplied data is the requirement that's proposed that would determine the parking that's required. There also are some other factors that already exist in the code, including the ability to calculate the proximity of the site to public transit, a pathway network, additional bicycle parking. There are some agreements that are required and some covenants per the workforce housing program that would be required for this particular conversion. The density calculation is that it could be up to a 1-to-1 hotel motel room to dwelling unit conversion if certain criteria can be met. And that includes that minimum of 6% of that communal space within the unit, and a minimum of 10% as exterior common open space. So you have both interior community space and exterior community space that's part of the project and for the use of the tenants. And that there be no minimum number of micro-efficiencies that can be part of a conversion. It proposes minimum unit sizes for various room types, from micro-efficiency at 210 square feet up to 698 square feet for a 3-bedroom, as you can see here. There's the comparison that we've started from our workforce housing commercial conversion program to adaptive reuse conversion. Our workforce housing commercial conversion program allows for any commercial structure in the town to be converted to workforce housing. And it has to use the existing building square footage. And that workforce housing conversion has a different minimum unit size chart that you can see here. So workforce housing has slightly larger minimum unit sizes. What this adaptive reuse is a 30% reduction in the workforce housing minimum unit sizes. And then because of that ratio, that 1-to-1 dwelling unit from hotel unit to dwelling unit, and the requirement in the town's workforce housing, there's a limitation on the number of micro-efficiencies that can be allowed. And therefore, it makes it very difficult to meet the requirements of the workforce housing commercial conversion when you're converting a hotel into housing. You would either have to combine rooms to meet the minimum unit sizes because you cannot have more than 50% micro-efficiencies in the build-out. So there are some compatibilities and some differences among the two conversion options. Here's a map that shows existing hotel properties on the island. It's probably a little bit easier for you to see on the screen in front of you, but there's 17 that are listed here in various locations around the island. Timeshare properties are not eligible for this conversion program. And really this amendment is designed to address housing shortages, needs within our community to provide housing for our workforce, promote adaptive reuse of some of the island's hotels and motels that are either defunct or vacant, while also ensuring high standards for living conditions. Any questions?
All of these hotel properties that we have that have potential for conversion, I guess they're all active. There's none that are like not open for business.
There are some that are underperforming that are included that that may be looking for redevelopment options.
And I guess the other thing is, I guess my question of timeshare properties is certainly not available for that. But are there other properties potentially that could be converted into, other buildings or other commercial properties potentially?
There are. So our workforce housing commercial conversion program allows the commercial conversion of, in various zoning districts, from commercial to housing, multifamily, workforce housing, meeting the program criteria. And that program, there's a range of requirements, eligibility requirements, minimum unit sizes for that conversion, and terms. And so, yes, there are other existing opportunities through that workforce housing commercial conversion program for other properties that are not hotels and motels to convert.
Simmons, I think, had a question.
Yeah, Chad is raising his hand. Oh, you may see. I guess I'm just trying to figure in my head, is these are in favor of these conversions, or is it just setting the standards so high that the likelihood of these conversions taking place is probably slim to none? I mean, and how do you get to these conversion ratios that spell out the size and how much living area, and all this? I mean, it seems like underperforming hotels are going to have a tough time trying to convert with what I see as some pretty stringent rules to do so. So is it something in favor of this type of structure for workforce when it seems to meet this criteria? You're going to have somebody spending a lot of money and may move away from that thought of workforce, but I guess maybe the studies show that this is feasible, or could be feasible, or might be feasible. Clearly, it sets some guidelines very clearly. I think they're pretty, having not done all of the reading on this, they seem pretty strict.
Right. We have been approached by some developers who are looking at this type of hotel motel conversion for workforce. And there's a similar proposal, text amendment proposal, that actually is going to go to town council tomorrow from a developer, and a little bit different version of a hotel motel conversion. So, and we've had inquiries from other potential developers looking to convert some other properties, hotel properties on the island. And you're right that we want to make sure that we still maintain thriving hotel uses on our island for that transient user who wants to come here for a short period and be on Hilton Head. But this is an opportunity, again, for those either vacant or underperforming hotels to have an opportunity to convert. So the density, in these areas, many of the residential densities that are set are much lower than what this conversion would yield. So in some areas, the residential density is 4 dwelling units per acre, for example. A hotel density is 35 rooms per net acre. So you can just see right there that there could be a difference in a 1-to-1 conversion and what that density yield is. And so it requires additional program or policy to achieve that kind of density, if that is what the community would like to enact.
Yes, Mr. Hens?
Yeah, I think I would just like to mirror what Mr. Simmons is saying. It is what it is. The hotel, the underutilized hotel, the room sizes are X square feet. The common area inside is X square feet. The exterior common space, the parking, they've got this parking. So you can't really you know, necessarily make all these changes because it's already built. So if you want to allow an underutilized property to be converted to workforce housing, which we desperately need, it seems like you gotta be able to play with some of the requirements so that it fits, so that it works.
That's right. So it may require that if they don't have that 6% interior space, it may be that they're modifying a room that's near the lobby and that's another communal living room. And that means that it's not quite a 1-to-1 ratio. It may be that even though we're allowing in this proposal developer supplied data, maybe their parking lot is their constraint. And that means that they need to maybe not convert all of the rooms because they're not gonna meet the parking requirements. But it is up to a 1-to-1 ratio if certain criteria can be met. And it's balancing, this being a conversion program that is relatively, attainable from this type of use to multifamily workforce use. But it still meets some livability requirements for those residents that could be occupying the site. And so it's a little bit of both that is included in this policy.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Counselor?
One thing I think it's advisable to do here is to take a look at, really as a practical matter, what's the applicability of this? Does anybody reasonably think the Hilton Beachfront Resort is going to be converted to workforce housing? The Omni was originally the Mariners Inn. It's timeshare. I think the Palmera Inn, number 8 up there, is timeshare also. The Inn at Harbor Town, yeah, that sounds like workforce housing to me. As a practical matter, there are maybe 3 of those that might be candidates for this. I, quite some time ago, looked at number 1, the Simple Rewards Motel, doing a commercial conversion project on that. But guess what? There's a set of restrictive covenants on that property that prohibits residential use. So, absent an amendment of those covenants, you can't turn it into residential use. The Hampton Inn, it's been there for a while. I don't know whether it's underutilized or not. The Red Roof Inn has been there for a while. I don't know if it's, but most of the other ones on there that aren't oceanfront or near oceanfront are all fairly new. And I guarantee you they have huge mortgages on there. And their lenders are not going to want to see them converted. So I think I don't think, from the square footage standpoint, I don't think this is the way the town wants to go, because who wants to try and live in 210 square feet? That's, like someone once said, that's not living, that's existing. And so I think as a practical matter, there are a lot of concerns here that I have that likely make this a project that's targeted at only one of those properties. And I never think it's a good idea to go through a big zoning change for one particular project. Thanks.
Thank you, good comment.
Thank you, Chet. Okay, item 5 is subdivision, major subdivision and major development plan review process changes. So part of the priority amendments includes a change to improve project transparency, enhance community involvement, and ensure the public is better informed about potential developments in their neighborhood. The amendment as proposed is to require the Planning Commission hold a public hearing for the review of major subdivisions and major development plans. And this would ensure, again, that they're reviewed publicly and the community has an opportunity and a platform to learn more about the project, ask some questions. There will be a notice requirement that there are letters mailed to owners, property owners within 500 feet and any homeowner association within 500 feet, as well as posting a public notice sign on the property. These again would allow the developer, residents, and staff to understand concerns before plans are approved by the town. As proposed, it also, the text amendment allows the LMO official to refer minor development plan reviews that are adjacent to residential uses through this process. We had heard from council that major developments and subdivisions need to be communicated better to neighborhoods that are impacted, that the community wants to be more informed, that additional public review and scrutiny would result in better developments. They indicated the Planning Commission may need additional training on development plan and subdivision review, that we should have a larger notice requirement than our standard 350 feet. And they were looking at additional signs within the vicinity. So I described the amendment prior to, it's a public hearing at the Planning Commission with that mailed notice and sign. The change, the amendment also requires a pre-application. Right now, pre-applications are recommended and not mandatory. And then it also allows that discretionary advancement by the LMO official of minor development plans if they are adjacent to residential. So this amendment is really about transparency and ensuring that adjacent neighbors are aware of major developments in their vicinity. Any questions?
Earlier, right?
So, I mean, as says, if it applies for minor, it says major development, so minor will get,
So for the minor, Mr. Simmons, it was only if it's adjacent to residential that the LMO official has the discretion
okay,
to ask that it go through. It may be that it is not of community concern, and then it would not need to go through this public review step. Any questions?
Okay, I think we're good. I'm sorry, Chet.
And this is a matter I haven't discussed with Mr. before, but as you mentioned, one of the prior sets of amendments basically went through and took out all the discretionary approvals that the town staff has. So to put another discretionary approval back in, it raises, things like this ought to be objective. Yes, you have to do it. No, you don't have to do it. Because it puts the official then in a position of saying, well, I'm not going to require a public hearing on your plan, but I am going to require it on your plan. Similarly situated applicants ought to be treated exactly the same. Either the minor ones ought to go through the public review, or they shouldn't go through the public review. Don't leave some people wondering, well, why do I have to do this when somebody else didn't? Thanks.
I heard that as well. Thank you for clearing that up. It's a good comment and a good question. It always concerns me when we have the word discretion in there. Discretion of who's working that day, or what kind of mood they're in, or how they may even see, that minor subdivision or that project. So discretion is a word that certainly draws attention, so thank you for pointing that out.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
but is there a criteria that is established that determines minor from major?
I'm sure there is.
Then I don't see why that would be a problem. If you fit the criteria for a minor subdivision, then that means that you're excused from this process. But if you don't fit that criteria, and that criteria is transparent, everybody's aware of it, then that means you have to, you have to go through the necessary steps.
Yeah, I think that was Mr. Williams's point.
Okay.
So I was summarizing the text amendment language. I've highlighted on the screen what the proposed text amendment says, and I think Mr. Williams is referring to that area within the commas at their discretion, and has the ability to, if what I'm hearing is that it just remove that discretionary, but that requires it when it is adjacent to or across the street from a residential use, which was the qualifier here. And I think that may address the concern.
And if I may again, I'm sorry. From the developer standpoint, they want to know what the rules are. A lot of them don't care what the rules are as long as they know what the rules are. Give me an objective list of what I have to do to get my approval. And with that, then they can do their pro formas and know whether or not they want to do their development. When you have this sort of discretionary thing, then they don't know what the rules are. So that's the issue there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Duly noted. Okay. Let's go back to this one. Transportation Impact Analysis Plan. This is a proposed amendment to ensure that our existing transportation impact analysis plans have meaningful and positive impact on the community, and that it truly addresses the needs of the residents when there are, when a project requires this analysis, and that the impacts are mitigated. We reviewed these with the town council, and they asked about what are some of those thresholds or triggers for this type of study. Why don't we see more of these? They feel like it's just an exercise, and that it doesn't really make any improvements, even when it is required. Didn't want to also add upfront costs to a development if we're not really seeing the outcomes. And again, just wanted to make sure that they would result in meaningful roadway improvements to mitigate that new traffic. Overall, here is what the proposed amendment aims to achieve. One, it's renaming what is now called a traffic impact analysis plan to a transportation impact analysis plan. And that is because the proposed amendment requires that you study multimodal trips, so including walking, biking, and transit, not just vehicle trips. It lowers the threshold for when a transportation study is required. So right now, the threshold is if you generate 50 peak hour trips, or what the proposal is 50 peak hour trips, which the current threshold is 100 peak hour trips, excuse me. And then, of course, the inclusion of multimodal infrastructure in the study. It includes additional traffic impact mitigation options. So it's a broader range of strategies identified to address those transportation impacts. It changes the approving or reviewing entity from the LMO official to the town engineer, who is more of the subject matter expert for transportation studies. And it also incorporates within that study area a level of service standard for unsignalized intersections, requires mitigation measures for those intersections, and then eliminates the practice of discounting impacts from that background traffic, that traffic that's already there, that's not really generated by your particular development. It's actually quite this amendment has a lot of changes, but overall, this summarizes what that amendment said is aimed at achieving here on the screen. Do you have any questions? Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
All right, Mr. Williams.
Many years ago, I made a good living doing traffic impact analysis presentations to the Planning Commission. But Missy's right, reducing the threshold from 100 PM or AM peak hour trips down to 50 is going to result and a number of other projects that currently would not have to go through the process to go through it. But I do have a problem with with eliminating the practice of discounting background traffic, because every traffic engineer will tell you that as time goes on, every roadway has a little more and more background traffic. I mean, cars that pass through an intersection, not because of the impacts of a particular proposed development, but they're going to pass through the intersection anyway. And doing that greatly penalizes the developer, because then the developer can be cast in the position of having to mitigate for effects that he did not cause. And that, I'll put it to you bluntly, is unconstitutional. The Supreme Court has said on numerous occasions that a developer can be required to mitigate the adverse effects that his particular development is going to cause. But a developer cannot be made to mitigate the effects that are pre-existing or that he otherwise did not cause, because that is a burden that should be properly placed on the general public as a whole. So I think that's a big potential problem there. And it does open this up to some potential for litigation. So just keep that in mind, please. Because I'm not a litigator, so it doesn't do me much any good. But I could do some more traffic impact analysis plans here, so thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Chet. I think we need to talk about that a little bit more. Make sure we're understanding that as we move this forward. Any other questions from the task force? Okay. All right, common open space. We've been looking at our residential subdivision requirements and our open space regulations, and looking at how those spaces can better ensure that new developments align with community expectations and have livability built into our regulations. We do in our current regulations, some open spaces tend to be poorly planned or underutilized, where they're just meeting that minimum percentage of open space required, and it is not organized in the subdivision in any meaningful way. Meaning that some of the open space, you might have a little pocket up by the driveway, a little corner of your buffer adjacent to the street, your stormwater pond, maybe an area that's part of your common open space. But ultimately, you may have a subdivision where there's really no place to recreate or play catch with your family or walk your dog. And so these changes are meant to provide a little bit more requirements that it be common open space and that it's meaningful common open space. So we had heard from council when we talked about this amendment that the connection of open space and tree protection and lot coverage is part of what makes our island character special, that we need more greenery around roadways. A lot of our open space regulations are not functional or usable. Ensure that the definition of common open space does not allow impervious areas to be counted, like parking lots. There are concerns that some of these regulations may result in smaller lots to provide the additional open space. That open space should be required also in minor subdivisions. Right now, there's no open space requirement in minor. And that our land acquisition manual should support property in existing neighborhoods, near properties in existing neighborhoods with open space where none exists currently. The amendment that's proposed here to address common open space is to change the term from open space to common open space to emphasize that this space is shared within the particular development. It removes some of the things that are currently counted in our open space calculations, such as detention facilities and natural water bodies. But we also are adding that dock or boardwalk is part of that calculation. So you can still have a a natural water body, but that water body itself would not be counted. However, that public dock space, boardwalk, can be calculated into your percentage calculation. That remnant open space, those spaces that provide no functional or aesthetic value are excluded from the open space calculations, that those credits adjacent to the street and buffers can no longer be applied to the open space calculations, that open space be accessible and integrated within the development and connected via pathways, that there are design requirements that are identified in the text that establish specific criteria regarding the minimum width for an open space area and that they be connected. And then that open space is available to all residents within the development. And that summarizes the open space amendments for the priority set. Any questions?
Yeah, when we have the discussion about open space, and you got several different descriptions here, and that does impact the usable size of the property though, right? So when it kind of, I guess, bumps into some of the other requirements, such as the turnarounds and the, you know, how much space you have to have for the emergency vehicles and things like that. I think it was last year, recently I had someone ask me a question similar to what you just described, but then we found out that the wetlands that ran adjacent to the property could not be counted as open space. So it kind of made the property a little smaller, which triggered another situation.
Okay.
So when we count this open space and it impacts the size of the property itself, is there any exceptions for some of the other things that are required on that property? Or do you just have to deal with the smaller property?
So in this amendment, the percentage of open space is not changing that's required. So it's just how that calculation is made. So major residential subdivisions require 16% open space, and that remains the same. It's a change to what counts, what areas can be counted to achieve that calculation. And so it could result in this requirement that potentially your overall density yield could be impacted, but without analyzing those major impacts. It's meant to be a way to achieve that meaningful common outside space outside of your individual lot in that subdivision that's available for the community to, and again, it applies to major subdivisions only, to have that space that's meaningful and functional.
So, I heard you say it's not required for minor subdivisions, but is that language changing as well? Did you also say something? We're not going to require that?
No, it's not required in a minor subdivision today, and it's not proposed in this amendment set, no.
Other questions? Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Williams has a question or a comment?
Well, actually, if I may, I'd like to go back for a moment to transportation issues, because I remember seeing the dreaded discretion word again in there somewhere, and I couldn't find it in the write-up, but if you look on page 75 of 164 of your packet, this is, the top of the page says Chapter 16-2 Administration, and this goes over the Transportation Impact Analysis Plan Review. And if you look at the bottom of that page, the new language says, provided, comma, at the discretion of the town engineer, comma, there are no readily apparent improvements necessary to adjacent roadways or intersections or potential transportation safety hazard created by the development. The following types of development may, I don't know, again, may, either it is or it isn't. Shall is the correct word there, exempt. And if you look at sub A there, it's purporting to say that development that is exempt from plan approval can still, if the traffic engineer says so, have to go through a traffic impact analysis. That's completely antithetical to the concept of exempt from development plan approval, because the transportation analysis is part of the development plan approval. So the traffic, and nobody in the town staff should have the discretion to say that a proposed, something that is exempt from approval, all of a sudden is not exempt from approval. So that doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Thanks.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions about that, or can we move on to trees?
Any other questions?
I guess what Mr. Williams says, it's a direct conflict, yeah.
The discretionary language, yes, I noted it. We will
Yeah.
look at that.
Discretions in shall and may. I think we can keep going.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. Tree protection. There are some priority amendments that are proposed to strengthen our tree protection during development and ensure that new projects align with the community's environmental values. And in the full code overhaul, we will look at our two tree classification system and look at it in a larger, more comprehensive way. Right now, this is looking at protection of two types of oak trees that are better protected, as well as expanding our plant back requirements and expanding our native plant list for the most part. When we talked about trees and tree protection with council, they said they would like to see us reinspect sites that have had tree planting after a certain period of time, that we focus on protecting high-quality trees, that we emphasize the plant back trees and buffers along streets, examine if water oaks should be protected as they're generally hazardous, examine the effectiveness of the 2019 tree amendment that addressed clear cutting, and prohibit tree clearing in advance of a submission of a development permit were some of the things that were discussed. Planning Commission asked that we review and assess all tree protection requirements, including a simplified system, which we will do so in the full code. This amendment is relatively smaller in scope, but it looks at, or it proposes enhanced tree protection of just two types of oaks, live oaks and laurel oaks, by lowering that diameter at breast height, DBH, of which those are protected. It increases or updates those mitigation requirements, and so the replacement trees are of larger sizes. So that plant back, ensuring that when you have to plant back, that they will be larger trees that will hopefully reach maturity sooner. This amendment expands a list of approved native plants. And then it also removes an exception for single-family lots. Specimen tree protections are extended to include single-family lots outside of PD1 district, which would reduce unnecessary removal of significant trees and specimen trees. Right now, single-family lots are not required. Specimen tree protections do not protect those on single-family lots currently.
Anybody else? You have a question?
Yeah, so what are the penalties if a developer takes down trees that they're not allowed to take down?
We have an enforcement section within our code, and we can write notices of violation. We can issue citations and require mitigation.
I think Mr. Williams had a question or a comment.
I do, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right now, the code exempts any specimen trees on a single-family lot from the tree regulations. And the proposed language strikes the phrase, with the exception of specimen trees located on single-family lots. The write-up says, protections are extended to include single-family lots outside of the PD1 district. I don't see anything in reference to outside of the PD1 district, but even if it does, the burden of this falls on the native island community. I live in Spanish Wells. If I own a vacant lot there, I can cut down a specimen tree with impunity. But if I own a lot in Old House Creek, I can't. You know, sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. If it's a good thing to protect specimen trees on single-family lots outside of the PD1 districts, then it's likely a good thing to protect those trees inside the PD1 districts. So I don't see any reason why you'd want to exempt the PD1 districts from that sort of regulation. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Williams. I think that's a very good point.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask, is the question, the protection of the trees for single-family interest in or out PD1? Or is it for,
Protection of the trees overall.
or is it for the family to have the right, if they needed to remove a specimen tree? What if there's a native islander on that subject that has a small parcel they want to develop, and there's potentially a specimen tree on that parcel? Does that mean that parcel cannot be developed because the tree exists? Or will that owner have the right to remove that tree if necessary?
Yeah. Yeah. Mrs.
So, if there's documentation from an arborist that recommends that that tree can be removed because it's diseased or hazardous, then yes. Otherwise, removal of specimen trees requires a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals. And right now, removal of specimen trees within planned development districts require approvals from those planned development district ARBs. And this change, I'll try to pull that up. I'll get to that section. It's on page 114 of 164. Hold on. Here it is. I was trying to show where the exception on single-family lots was being removed from, and then how it can be removed if, as proposed here in item 4, as written.
Page 114
Correct. That I have on the screen. So I just wanted to make sure that you could see where that strikeout was and how, again, you could remove that specimen tree if this criteria can be met.
But outside of that, it's a no-go.
You would need to seek relief potentially from the Board of Zoning Appeals if it was within your development envelope that you were looking to develop. And there's certain criteria that would need to have been met
Okay.
to achieve a variance.
Chairman, is a
Yes.
PD1 a planned unit development?
Yes.
And is the town allowed to make zoning changes in a PUD or is it not?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, please. I was just reading through something else here myself, but, yes, sir.
Missy's rationale that, well, in the PUDs, there are ARBs that regulate that. I could show you, if you give me a couple of days to research it, I could probably show you a slew of covenants and restrictions on individual subdivisions that are not in PUDs that provide for ARB control over the removal of trees. So it's either you can remove, well, what ought to be applicable in the PUD and the PD1 districts ought to be applicable every place else. Why is it that only predominantly the Ward 1 areas have to worry about these regulations when all the PD1 districts don't? That's, in my mind, that's patently unfair. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, I would just say that the intent was not that it would apply just to a limited geography, but that it would expand the protection of specimen trees within single-family lots because they're accepted now. So I will make sure to follow up with Mr. Williams to make sure that the intent of this change is being realized in the text language.
Yeah, I heard the intent, when you started this whole section. But that's a good point and a good question, so. Yes, sir.
I've heard numerous anecdotal stories over the last couple of years that because of damages that have resulted to homes inside the PD1s as a result of hurricanes and such, that the ARBs there are much more liberal now with allowing people to take out whatever trees they want. So that I don't know, there is much in the way of tree protection under the, say, for example, the Sea Pines ARB guidelines. So another thing to keep in mind. Thanks.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I guess in the midst of all of the discussion, currently, single-family lots can take out specimen trees is what I'm hearing. We currently can or cannot.
They can. The LMO accepts them currently.
And the new ruling would say, like PD1, now classified along with single-family, the change is that you have to go through the process, if I might say.
Correct. So right here, the current language that's proposed to be struck currently says that no specimen tree may be removed except in accordance with existing paragraph B, which is getting struck. In addition, all specimen trees shall have the following protections, whether located on public or private land, with the exception of specimen trees located on single-family lots. And it's there that that's how single families are exempt from specimen tree protections currently in our existing code. And what was trying to be achieved was that there were additional protections for specimen trees on single-family lots. But I've heard loud and clear that we need to make sure that we are achieving the intended outcome of better protection that's applied for single-family sites. And so I'll get back with Mr. Williams and coordinate further.
Yes, sir.
And I just want to say, to the town staff's credit, for the last 5 or 7 or maybe more years, the way they have handled this with respect to new subdivisions is they won't approve a new subdivision that has a specimen tree on a single-family lot. For example, if you look at the subdivision plat, I think of Silver Moss on Spanish Wells Road, there are a number of specimen trees out there, but they're all in the common areas. They won't let you subdivide a piece of property into single-family residential lots with a specimen tree on it, which I think is a great idea because that avoids an issue. But to tell someone in the Ward 1 area that you can't cut down that tree that's on your lot, while someone in Sea Pines or Hilton Head Plantation, they can cut down exactly the same tree. That just smacks of unfairness. Thanks.
Thank you. Good point.
Well, we have a little bit more work to do on that, so we'll make some modifications to that prior to taking it to the Planning Commission.
Okay.
Any other input?
I think you're good to move.
Okay. Signs. There is a proposed text amendment to ensure compliance with federal case law, adopting content-neutral sign code. There is a U.S. Supreme Court decision, Reed versus Town of Gilbert, which invalidated a town sign regulations for distinguishing between different types of non-commercial messages, such as political or event-related signs. So the court made it clear that regulations based on the content of signs needs to be avoided. And so content-based rules are subject to strict scrutiny, which in simply put, this amendment is to achieve a sign code that's content neutral. The feedback from council was, yes, we need to amend the sign code to be compliant with federal law. It's a best practice. Reed case requires content neutrality. Do what we should do to be compliant with this Supreme Court decision. So in that, the proposed amendment clarifies the intent of our sign regulation chapter, refines the purpose and intent, removes any content-based regulation, focusing instead on objective criteria like size, location, and design to comply with those legal requirements. There's a few housekeeping amendments for clarity to correct some inconsistencies. It creates some general categories: interior site signs, temporary yard signs, some permitting thresholds for driveway access point signs, interior site signs, and these thresholds would determine whether a sign permit is required. And then there's a prohibition of inappropriate signs. But if you look at the sign code amendment, there's a lot of strikeout included in that particular amendment, as our sign code was content-based in a lot of areas, where you had to read the sign to know how to regulate it.
Right.
Yep.
Yes, Mr. Hens, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, so the interior signs category. So we don't allow neon signs on Hilton Head, but what if the neon sign is hanging on your window that's overlooking the street? Is that?
We can still have some design criteria, like, neon, for example. But, there are some, like, we wouldn't be able to read the sign, but we still can achieve some aesthetics in our sign code.
Inside, that's not what
Right,
interior.
right. So it's the size, location, design. So that's like the sign in your interior, your exterior signs, your, whether it's a yard sign or not. But if you look at all the sections that are struck, we had real estate signs. Well, you have to read the sign to know that's a real estate sign. But what it really is a yard sign, a temporary yard sign. And so it's just recategorizing sign types that we might come encounter with in a content neutral approach. And it's based on those parameters that we can regulate, mostly size, location, and design. And duration.
So, Missy, quick question. When we talk about the content on the signs, what triggered that discussion, or how do we monitor that, regulate it? Where's the line? I mean, is it collard greens for sale to offensive, or is it some kind of view or statement? Where's the trigger?
On the inappropriate signs?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about the content, so most of the content is okay, right? I mean, as long as it's not offensive or profane.
Yes, so that's where, yes, it has to be content neutral, that you're not reading the sign to know how to regulate it, but at the same time, we don't want signs that are offensive or inappropriate, and that's where that prohibition of inappropriate signs comes in. But for the most part, we will not be regulating the content of what is on that sign.
I guess.
most signs.
Okay, yeah, I mean, because when we have these events now, is that a different criteria for special events, you know, for temporary, we do things
Temporary
that,
signs are included.
so when we do, you know, like Mitchellville or Wine Festival and things like that, those signs are okay? Is this going to affect how we do signage for the events?
They're just going to be in a different category.
I think Mr. Williams had his hand up for a question or a comment.
This is a change that has been a long time coming. The Supreme Court has said that when it comes to signs of this, you can regulate the time, place, and manner of them, but you can't regulate what they say. You can't regulate the content of it. And the town's gone a long way to address that, but they still have one big glaring problem, and that's on page 150 of your packet. It's up at the very top. This is a section under prohibited signs. Number 12 says, signs that are not located on the parcel of the business or development that identifies, except signs that are specifically allowed under the section exempt. The only way you can determine whether a sign is located on the parcel of the business or development it identifies is by looking at the content of it. This is what is commonly referred to as an off-premise sign. So under this section, if I wanted to put up a sign where my office is that says, "Hey tourist, one of the greatest historic spots on Hilton Head Island is historic Mitchellville Freedom Park. You should go see it." I can't do that under this, but it's because of what the content of the sign says. Now, admittedly, I agree this opens the floodgates to who knows what, but off-premise signs are, by their very definition, content-based. And I think you still got a big, big problem with that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for helping me ask that question earlier when we start talking about content. Yeah.
So that was on page 150, and it was which number?
Number 12 at the very top.
Okay.
Very good.
Any other comments on signs?
I think we're good.
Okay, number 10, getting there.
All right.
Construction management standards. So construction projects have impacts on the surrounding area for both commercial and residential construction activity. These disruptions, noise, vibrations, dust, traffic congestion, parking challenges, restricted access can disrupt daily operations. We have heard frustration from residents and commercial businesses and are looking to minimize those negative impacts, at the same time recognizing that construction activity does have a lot of positive benefits, including job creation and economic stimulation, and improvements to infrastructure, public spaces that do enhance our community. So we wanted to make sure that these regulations both balance the positive outcomes with the need to manage those disruptions and temporary nuisances. We discussed this with council in September, and they talked about some of the impacts of construction spilling over into commercial and residential areas that cause disruptions, that these disruptions are frustrating, but they also realize that they do benefit the community and provide positive impacts. They suggested changing the hours of construction. That is something other than what's currently allowed, which is between the hours of 10 a.m. or 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. And to align those with some of the standards that are already set within some of our larger planned development communities and other best practices. So this amendment is twofold, and it has a complementary noise ordinance amendment that is going to go to council tomorrow. Part of the construction management standards include that there is a site plan, site management plan that is required, that details their operations of the construction site and how they're organizing their construction activity. That construction hours are limited to 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. or sunset, whichever comes first. And that there are some exceptions from construction activity on major holidays. Their site management plan has to show where their trash and refuge is going to be held, where they plan to have their construction parking, and any traffic control operations that are necessary. Another change is some tropical cyclone preparedness, that construction sites be secured when we have a named storm warning or watch. And that should reduce the risk of debris and damage to surrounding properties if that unsecured construction materials move off the site. We did evaluate some of the plan development communities' requirements as they relate to construction day and time standards, as that was some of the feedback we received from council. Most of those plan development communities do restrict construction activity, mostly from Monday through Friday, some with Monday through Saturday, and they do have a reduction in work hours. This chart outlines those comparisons of those other communities. 7 to 7 in Hilton Head Plantation, with some commercial vendors and contractors, limited for some days of the week and hours and holidays. Sea Pines is 7 to 7 with no work on Sundays. Palmetto Dunes was 7 to 7, and they need approval for work on Saturdays, and the ARB provides that approval. Port Royal was 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., Monday through Friday. Shipyard was Monday through Friday, 7 to 7, but with work approval on Saturdays by Shipyard Security, with no work on Sundays or some major holidays. Wexford was 7 to 6, Monday through Friday, with permission on Saturdays that is requested, with some major holidays that are excluded. So the town's proposal on the noise component, that's part of this amendment set, that's also reflected in a reciprocal noise ordinance amendment, is to restrict construction hours between 7 and 7 or sunset, and excluding several major holidays. Any questions?
Questions?
Okay.
Okay.
So with all text amendments, there will be sites that become legal nonconformities when text amendments are approved. We have a chapter within our existing land management ordinance that handles nonconformities, both for sites and structures, that can be followed if there was a site or structure that becomes nonconforming because of these text amendments or any others. There are processes where substitutions of nonconformities can be, there's an application process, and it allows for some nonconformities of a site or structure to continue if certain criteria can be met, and those criteria are listed here. It does not allow development that increases any amount of encroachment into any setback or buffer, cannot increase the impervious coverage of the site over the maximum allowed, or the existing impervious coverage, whichever was greater. It has to lessen the extent of nonconforming site features to the greatest extent possible, will not have an adverse impact on public health, safety, or welfare, and lessen the extent of nonconformities related to nonconforming structures. So both the nonconforming site features and nonconforming structures to the greatest extent possible. So this is something that's within our code today that does allow for legal nonconforming sites and structures to be redeveloped, even if they have existing nonconformities. If they can meet certain criteria, which are outlined here and are handled through a process called substitution of nonconformities. There are other sections within the code, disaster recovery and disaster emergency, that applies if sites are damaged during disasters or disaster recovery period. That applies to quicker application processes and permitting. And so there's also some conditions that are required in our Title 15 chapter within the code as well. All text amendments are reviewed through the Planning Commission, and the criteria for text amendments are to meet these standards that are here. The Planning Commission may weigh the relevance of and consider whether and the extent to which the text amendment meets these criteria. And finally, last but not least, here's the section that outlines broadly the applicability of all these changes relative to family compounds and family subdivisions in historic neighborhoods. There are broadly, a lot of these changes do occur island-wide, which means that they would apply to properties within historic neighborhoods. However, we're not proposing in the priority amendment set changes to both our family compound or family subdivision application processes. And so those are handled through different review procedures that are outlined within the code in section 16.2.103 X and Y. And that means that these changes don't impact those review procedures that are specific to the review processes for family compounds and family subdivisions. There are, though, changes that do apply throughout, that are applicable townwide. And again, those would apply, as we mentioned, to historic neighborhoods. The workforce housing density bonus program, adaptive reuse, do not explicitly apply or require modifications for family compound or family subdivision. But where one of the properties is located for the workforce housing density bonus program for the North Point site is located within the Squire Pope historic neighborhood. And none of those adaptive reuse sites or those existing hotels are in a historic neighborhood. But generally speaking, there are some of these amendments that would be applicable townwide, therefore applicable within historic neighborhoods.
Questions, comments? Well, thank you, Missy. That's a handful. And I think we got some good input from there. Certainly there's a lot to digest as we keep trying to revise these LMO requirements. And I'm sorry, you have something else for me?
Well, I would just ask if the task force, has additional comments or questions, if you would like to email us to make sure that we are able to incorporate those. If you think of something after the meeting, feel free to email through our board coordinator, Sharonica. It'll get to me, and we'll be able to incorporate that as we bring these amendments through to completion. We really appreciate your review and your time and your feedback. It will make these amendments stronger.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you for your good work, and I appreciate Chet Williams for his comments and questions, and certainly his expertise in many of those areas. So trying to revise these LMO amendments with unintentional consequences, I think, is the thing we have to pay attention to. I know we're trying to do a good thing most of the time, but then we have to look at how it might affect one particular group or one particular area. If it's not fair to one, it should be fair to all, right? Is what I've learned today, so. Okay. Next on my agenda, on our agenda, we have the Historic Neighborhoods Permitting Design Studio report, and also the Home Safety and Repair Program update. And the sewer connection program update from Sharonica Stewart.
Good afternoon. Alrighty, Sharonica Stewart for the record. Starting off with our Historic Neighborhoods Permitting and Design Studio report. For this reporting period, we have had 2 new requests that we've received through the studio. Guidance was provided to applicants on zoning regulations, land use considerations, and pathways for property development. Staff continue to work with the applicants to ensure that their projects align with the guidelines, as well as preserving their historical and cultural integrity. To date, we have had a total of 97 design studio requests, 67 of which are completed, 22 remain active, and 8 have either been withdrawn or either they have become inactive. And that is all for the Historic Neighborhoods Permitting and Design Studio report, if anyone had any questions.
Questions? Very good. I'm sorry, you have something?
Funding,
Oh, yeah, we asked that.
do you have your funding for your program to continue at this point?
Oh, for home safety
Yes.
repair, I'll transition to that report really quickly.
But we're not, I'm sorry if we're not to that one yet.
No, you're absolutely fine.
Design studio.
Okay, all right. I know it came up in this.
Alrighty, and then moving forward to our home safety and repair program updates. So over the past 30 days, 8 projects have been successfully closed out, positively impacting 8 families within our community. So the program teams remain focused on completing the remaining projects under contract while actively researching funding avenues. To give you some program data, from the inception of the program in July of 2022 to January 2025, we have about 147 applications. Of those 147 that we have received, 113 were fully completed applications, 82 of which have been permitted jobs that have been completed. 26 are currently under contract, and we have about 7 that are currently awaiting additional program funding. Please note that those that have applied for our program, that we have also directed them to other programs, just as another source. I will also go ahead and give the update on the lateral sewer connection program, and then Mr. Simmons, if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and then answer your question. Regarding the lateral sewer connection program, we have successfully completed 32 connections to date, and town staff continue to actively collaborate with the Hilton Head Public Service District to complete the remaining projects. To date, we have received 48 applications, 32 of which have been completed. 4 jobs are currently under contract right now, and we have about 5 that are waiting for additional funding. Now, overall, as mentioned during the last meeting, our staff have continued to identify additional funding efforts for the programs. And I've shared some details with you all regarding program funding via email following our last meeting. But what I'm also going to do is just to provide additional information regarding our efforts as town staff. I'm going to invite Missy Lewick up just to speak as our Director of Planning.
Thank you, Sharonica. So our current program is funded through ARPA funds, so American Rescue Plan Act funding. Sharonica was able to share with you after last month's task force meeting the total allocations of both the home safety repair and the sewer connection program, and it's pretty remarkable. The home safety repair program total award was just under 1.5 million, 1.4997 million. And the lateral sewer connection has a program total of $369,000. And these statistics show how many community members have applied and have been receiving assistance through those programs. We certainly know the impact that these programs have had on improving the quality of life of our residents on our island community. And we have been exploring additional funding and sources to continue these programs. So once our ARPA funds are exhausted, of which we have encumbered all of those funds by the end of calendar year '24, we are looking at potential funding sources. We've looked at Beaufort Jasper Housing Trust, CDBG, South Carolina Housing, or other grants. Now, the program was stood up with a resolution and approval by council, and it was specific to ARPA funding as the funding source for both of these programs. Any continuation beyond the program would necessitate additional funding and direction from town council. As we explore all these additional funding sources that are out there and other entities that are providing these services that weren't there when our program started, we will package all that up and ask that question going forward. So, but most importantly, I think I want to emphasize that we truly understand, and Sharonica has been working on the program and spending a lot of time activating this work in our community. We've seen those significant improvements to homes. We've seen, most importantly, how the impact has had an effect on residents' quality of life. And I want to make sure that my team understands how thankful that I am, and I know the community is, that these programs have taken place. And it's a lot of commitment and hard work on our team, on the contractors performing the work, and it's a program to celebrate. And we're looking forward to exploring opportunities to continue the program and also to direct applicants to other entities that are performing similar services. But just know that we will report back when we have more information on how we may be able to continue to provide these services, either as a town-initiated project or with some partner agencies, as the Beaufort Jasper Housing Trust is having some meaningful impact in the home safety repair space.
Thank you for that, and I certainly appreciate your good work to continue to improve our community. I think this is also in response to the question that I believe Ms. Wright asked last month about, funding, or if the town could have some skin in the game, so to speak. But I believe we've addressed that, right? You guys are identifying other funding sources. We can't really spend town money on private property, as I understand it, right? Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's currently the advice that we've received from legal counsel. We're exploring how other communities do their home safety repair and similar programs. So there's extensive research that's been done and is underway. And as we do more research and know kind of where we can take the program and what's the best approach going forward, we will certainly share that with the task force.
Thank you. Mr. Hens, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm not sure the relationship between home safety and repair and sewer connection program. So I was wondering, Mr. Chairman, if we could just have two separate reports, because they're, in my view, two separate things. And then the second part on the sewer connection, can we get a report of the properties that aren't hooked up yet so that we can see the magnitude of what's left to do on the island?
We would have to work with our PSD partners to do that. There are sewer mains available. What continues to happen is additional development, so that number changes over time as far as properties that can, or households that can connect, and if they are connected or not. So, but as a lot of the newer connections were a result of new development and therefore needed those connections.
Thank you. I'm sorry, you have something, Mr.
So I
Simmons?
guess just a follow-up on Tom's question. If I'm following right, is it a matter of availability? Because I think the last report we had, that sewer is actually available for all residents right now. It's a matter of connection, right?
That's correct. So sewer mains are available. This is for that private connection from the main to the home. is what this program was funding.
Yeah, instead of waiting to be asked for somebody to connect, it's so important for the island as a whole to have sewer connection that I was wondering if we knew which properties needed assistance, if it could be more of an outreach as opposed to inquiry on our part.
So as I understand it, just to follow up on that question or comment, I guess you're saying we need to have some awareness so that people know this program exists. And the other part of that is that some people choose not to connect, right? And of course, lastly, some people don't qualify for this program. So those are some of the folks that maybe are not connected. It's not a matter of not being aware of the program or participating in the program. You can clean that up for me a little bit, Missy.
Sure, that's described accurately. Also, the sewer connection program is a complementary program to the Deep Well administers Project Safe, which they are still making connections, sewer connections through that program and through the funding that's allocated through that program. These statistics here speak to the town qualifications for the town's lateral sewer connection program. So there already is another community entity providing connections through that Project Safe program. But we can, to speak to the need, and we have had Pete Nardi from the Houghton Head PSD provide updates on how many properties are currently not connected. And he will tell you too the same, that those numbers do fluctuate. And then we have coordinated with the PSD on sending out postcards on some regular interval about both Project Safe and the town's lateral sewer connection program. So there have been outreach that has been facilitated with our PSD partner for this program.
If I may, in my conversations with the commissioners at the PSD, they reason that we are perhaps 95%, 97% complete in terms of those folks who would desire to have the service.
That sounds about right from one of the last updates I've received, but as I understand, it's always a number that does change based on additional development. Like, you know, you could have a particular street where all the homes are connected, well, then somebody decides to add an additional unit or add another home, and then, you know, now you have two more properties or two more structures that need a connection.
Mm-hmm. Questions, comments? Okay. Very good, thank you.
Thank you. That's my report as
That is your report. Thank you, Sharonica, as well. Sharonica, well, let me see if I have, oh, I'm sorry, I haven't followed my agenda. Okay, next item we have is introduction of Community Planning Manager, Michelle Mueller. Community Planning Manager. You have to do your own introduction? You don't have somebody to bring you up?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Michelle Mueller. I know a few of you in the room, but it's a pleasure to be here. I am the new Community Planning Manager under the Planning Department. And in this role, I'm looking forward to being responsible for overseeing the redevelopment goals and objectives in all the planning and capital improvement projects, major planning initiatives, the coordination of amendments to the LMO and municipal code, participating in the oversight of the Landmark Protection Program and the priority projects included in the 2019 Gullah Geechee Preservation Report as recommended by Town Council and approved by Town Council. I'm also looking forward to working with the district's project, which is underway. And we have had 2 very successful meetings with community members and stakeholders outlining sort of vision and the theme and the character, establishing that as seen by the community. Receiving that input is something I've enjoyed watching firsthand and experiencing. It's complementary to my prior experience. I come to this role with 3 years at the Chamber of Commerce locally, serving Hilton Head and Bluffton in the membership role. So small business community, that was really my passion. Serving them and helping connect the dots between stakeholders, small business owners, and opportunities throughout the Low Country. Prior to the Chamber, I was a small business owner for 9 years on the island. Having moved here in 2012, I was in property management and oversaw that for 9 years. So I really am looking forward to applying my expertise and experience in this role and serving the community planning department. Any questions?
Very good. Any questions? Well,
Okay.
well, welcome to the staff, and we look forward to working with you as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next item I have on my agenda is public comment on anything that is not on the agenda. Does anyone in my public have something they'd like to speak on? Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I believe Mr. Simmons is going to understand what it is I'm talking about here. I recently represented a couple of clients before the Planning Commission on an amendment of a previously recorded, I don't know that it was previously approved, subdivision. And when you look through the code, almost invariably, where the Planning Commission has review and approval authority, they have three options. They can approve the application as submitted, they can approve it with modifications or conditions, or they can deny it. But this one section of the code on amendments to previously platted subdivisions doesn't explicitly give the Planning Commission the authority to approve an application with conditions or with modifications. And I think that's something that needs to be included in the code. This rewrite that's going on is the perfect time to do that. And I think, like I said, I think Mr. Simmons remembers the situation. But I think it's inherent in the Planning Commission's authority, and it's clearly stated throughout the code in numerous places that they have the authority to approve with conditions or modifications.
So let me make sure I understand your question or your comment. You're saying that that is currently not in the code now?
Correct. It doesn't explicitly give the Planning Commission the authority to approve an application to modify a previously platted subdivision with conditions or modifications.
So let me make sure I understand. Right now, it's either approve or deny.
Correct. At least that's the town staff's position. I mean, my position was, I think inherently the Planning Commission has that authority.
Okay.
But it would help if the code explicitly stated that. Okay, thanks.
Okay, great, thank you. Anyone else have a public comment on a non-agenda item? Okay. Sharon, could we have anything on district planning that you want to share with us? Or that you can share with us? Yeah, before we close that, I acknowledge it.
Absolutely. So I do want to say thank you to you all from the Gullah Geechee Task Force who have been attending the district planning meetings. It's great to have you all as members of the task force joining and helping and assisting with these meetings. So this week, Marcia's district meeting.
Mr. Boxley, I just want to, if you're cutting out, thank you for being here. I just want to acknowledge you, and I appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Okay. I apologize, Sharonica, I just wanted to catch him before he left the room.
You're fine. You're fine. So Marcia's district meeting is this Wednesday, and it's the next district meeting within our historic neighborhoods. So the historic neighborhoods in the Marcia's district include Gardner, Spanish Wells, Old House Creek, Jonesville, as well as Jarvis. And the meeting will be, as I stated, this Wednesday, February the 5th at 5 p.m. And it will be hosted at Grace Community Church. Now, the meetings are typically from 5 to 7, and we encourage all those within the specific districts to come out and share their input. I'll tell you that 2 meetings have taken place thus far, one of which was the Skull Creek District Planning meeting, as well as Parkway Arts District. On average, there have been about 20 to 40 attendees at each of these meetings, and participation from you all, as well as the Planning Commission, has added an additional value. Each meeting includes a presentation overview, so I do want to state this, and I've been sharing this with community members who have been interested in attending, that each one does include a presentation overview of the district, followed by breakout stations, excuse me. There are 8 breakout stations, which include district themes, character, vision, aspirations, as well as focus areas. So this Wednesday is our Marsh's District meeting, and then upcoming meetings that will include historic neighborhoods are our Forest Beach District Planning meeting, which will be Thursday, February the 20th, as well as our Chaplin District Planning meeting, which will be Thursday, February 27th. So I encourage you guys to come out and attend, and I will definitely share this information with you all via email as well. Okay.
Okay, you have questions for Sharonica? I have one question or comment. In the meetings that we've had, and one most recently, what would you say is the temperature of the people who are attending and participating? Were they, willing participants? Did we hear any grievances or? I'm asking because, we have a history of trying to build this relationship with the town and the community, and that whatever that perception is, and how was this presentation received by the community?
I will tell you, regarding the district planning meetings, I was a participant within the meeting for Skull Creek, which was very good. We have had great feedback from those within, I would say, from our historic neighborhoods who have been participating in the district planning meetings. I would say the feedback that we're getting is what's needed and it's what's valuable, So I just want to encourage more individuals to come out and share their feedback, share what they see the vision for their community to be, what they see their vision for their district to be, what does the character look like, feel like. I would say the biggest thing is just getting additional individuals from our historic neighborhoods out and in participation of these events.
And I feel like, do you feel like the more people know that you're here now? You're meeting more people, and I know we're still trying to circulate you around to make sure that people know that you, as well as other staff, are here to try to improve those communities.
Absolutely. I will go reference back to Skull Creek. When I walked into that room and I saw many faces who recognized me and wanted to have conversations with me, that was definitely a pleasure.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you for your good work, and we'll look forward to continued success with that.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Okay, great. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I expressed this to Sharonda earlier, prior to, but I think I would like to have it added on the record, in as much as I mentioned about how if something is mentioned in one meeting, it may not be heard in any other meeting, but it has a reasonable application in the other areas. Would there be some consideration for that, or would that suggestion be limited only to that one community or district?
I think if we can recognize the benefit of something being community-wide, that will be the plus. Kind of back to the conversation earlier with Mr. Williams and you all saying if one thing is gonna apply to one, then it's better to apply to all. I'll tell you, all feedback from our district planning meetings is being properly documented. And we will take all comments into consideration.
Okay.
The biggest thing is getting our community members to actually attend, as well as there are surveys following these district planning meetings. So if we can share that with the community members that we are aware of, that would be great to get their feedback in that aspect.
And again, I feel confident that you would do it. I just wanted to be on the record.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharonica.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions or comments, I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Hentz, and to my colleagues, thank you for your time and input, and to my public, Mr. Williams, Mr. Pickett. And I lost 30% of my public with Mr. Boxley, but we find ourselves adjourned. Have a great afternoon, everybody.